Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Neeraj.
Hi. I welcome all of you for this very important initiative taken by AIMA, our core committee of HR, which is led by Mr. S.Y. Siddiqui. I think we all realize that we are living in not so usual times, and each one of us has a lot of ambiguity regarding what this pandemic would ultimately mean for organizations that we represent. I would like to welcome Mr. Siddiqui, who, as I said, is the chairperson of the HR committee at AIMA, and three of the very esteemed colleagues who would be speaking with us in the afternoon today. I already see Mr. Sudhakar. Welcome, Sudhakar. Thanks for doing this for us. We would have Mr. Dwarakanath after the break, and finally, Dr. Shalini Sarin. So the idea has been to understand what HR's role would be in the emerging scenario, and who could be better than Mr. S.Y. Siddiqui to kick off the proceedings. So without further ado, I hand over the platform to Mr. Siddiqui. Sir, welcome, and look forward to your inputs on the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'll just request Neeraj, Ashish, if you can check if all the participants, all the delegates are able to hear us well, can see the video well. I think a quick chat confirmation will be helpful. And again, once again, welcome to this first eDialogue organized by AIMA. And I think we are looking at the most current, the most hot, most crucial, critical subject of business and HR challenges amid the coronavirus pandemic. And I think I'll be using few slides so that perhaps slides will help you understand what I am trying to convey. But at the outset, I think when we were discussing the design of this eDialogue, one thing which was very clearly in our mind is that the objective today is not to offer you any quick fixes or magical solutions. Because honestly speaking, the crisis has been so unprecedented that we have all been caught unprepared, completely taken by sudden surprise. And it will be a kind of maybe a lie if some of us say that we have got some magical solutions or quick fixes on this. I think we are just assessing as we go by, maybe today the 30th day of the lockdown. We are just learning every day and trying to decode that what could be post-COVID once perhaps the lockdown is lifted and hopefully this pandemic is coming under some control, maybe towards normal, maybe 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line. I think we'll have to look at growing into, adapting into this new normal, and then perhaps find that what will be the best way to handle the business and HR related issues. Today, perhaps myself and when we talk of Sudhakar and then Dwarka will share and then Dr. Shalini Sarin, maybe we'll help generate some perspectives based on our kind of overall experience and this very strange experience of the lockdown. So, Neeraj, I think Ashish, any confirmation that audio and video working well?
I guess I saw a lot of people raising their hands, sir. So I believe it's working well. And anybody who's had any problem with audio or the video, you can chat in, and the host and the IT backbone would help you on the same. No worries.
All right.
Yeah,
That's perfect. So
yeah.
next maybe 20-25 minutes, we'll just go ahead. So if I request Ashish, if you just start the PPT presentation, please. So when we are looking at this COVID-19, a kind of an unprecedented crisis globally, as we all experience now, I think one perspective which is coming very clearly is India and the rest of the world realize the potential danger of globalization for the first time. Ashish, we can go to the first slide, please. When we are looking at globalization, we are looking at global travel, which became the easiest mode of transmission of the dangerous virus. So earlier, people coming from US or UK in the family, friends or corporate circles were reasonably fine. But those very people actually became the carriers of this very dangerous kind of virus. Maybe when we are looking at this 21st March onwards, this typical lockdown experience, which became formal from 24th announcement, midnight 24th, starting from the Honorable Prime Minister's address to the nation, I think the initial reaction was shock to not being able to understand that what this lockdown means, reflecting a crisis, of course. And initially, I think what I observed is indiscipline in all of us, in and around our residential sectors, our companies, and the way people were trying helter skelter, something or the other. And finally, I think we all accepted the fate of this lockdown, that it is in the best interest of all of us. Maybe when we look at the business, only thing which I can talk today, it's a huge hit, no doubt, on business, trade, and industry. But the extent is yet to be assessed. I think I have been following some media reports, and there have been some assessment on automotive industry. But I think to a great extent, we'll have to wait and see how much hit the business, trade, and industry will be taking. When we look at this, direct hit to the business, we are not only confining ourselves to the lockdown from 20th March onwards, but I think I am looking at maybe a 6 to 9 month perspective, and I'll cover that part of this, presentation, whatever thinking I can contribute today. And maybe when we are looking at this likely challenge of restart, I think it will not be normal, first thing, because the moment we talk about lifting of the lockdown, maybe effective 4th May, I am not too sure it will be a kind of a normal exercise. It can be varying from state to state. It can be taking into consideration the trends of this pandemic around that time, around 30th April. And then there can be very strict countermeasures in certain geographical areas of the country. So I'm not looking at a very normal, lifting of the lockdown effective 4th May. Borders and movement of people and material may be an issue when we look at lifting of the lockdown. Next slide, please. I think one thing which is very clear, and which in some of the sessions starting from 2nd April onward with different professional agencies, uh, incidentally, I use this word emergence of the new normal. And it is to a great extent getting validated from senior people, from speakers, thought leaders, from people who have this great experience and leading organizations, that this is for sure that we are looking at emergence of this new normal. And perhaps when we look at this totally unprepared, kind of no prior experience, as I said in the beginning, crisis of such magnitude is very, very tough at this point of time to decode. Post COVID, what will be the kind of experience? Maybe when we are looking at lockdown, as I said, very strange to start with, and basically forcing all of us into work from home. And somewhere perhaps this technology came into a great kind of support, where perhaps for auto industry, in my case, we never believed in working from home, because we all were driven by this thought that we have to be there physically to look at making cars, to look at selling cars, to look at supply chain, to look at HR and finance and everything. But I think literally we have learned the new normal by 30-40% being effective working from home in terms of connectivity with our teams, maybe decision making, maybe direction setting, maybe preparing, and maybe trying to think together and trying to look at post lockdown how we are going to operate. When we are looking at maybe the different sectors of business, I think they are impacted differently, and that kind of assessment will carry on post lockdown also. Only thing which we have experienced, I think, coming into looking at various colleagues from different companies working from home, that our residential bandwidth, connectivity, speed of internet is a big challenge compared to what we get into the workplace. So there, perhaps in case of Maruti, also our experience has been that for people in engineering function, R&D function, perhaps the biggest challenge has been the slow internet and low bandwidth at our residential places. And therefore, in spite of connectivity, I think we have been facing problems of actual productivity and effectiveness. Now, perhaps when we are looking at learning by the day, as a new experience, part of this new normal. Every day they're learning for us. And today is perhaps the first day when we have started some bit of preparatory work at our plants. And I think the whole day has been full of new learnings, which we are somewhere planned and somewhere totally unplanned. Next slide, please, Ashish. Perhaps when we are looking at some key challenges, I think quickly I would like to draw your attention is how the businesses and corporates are coping with the lockdown. I think we all tumbled into this crisis unprepared, as we all must have experienced. Maybe biggest challenge of business leaders today is this work from home or this disruption, how best to handle, and maybe look at this restart, how we are going to do it, maybe 4th May. Of course, perhaps when we are working from home, there are new perspectives, new learnings, but to a great extent, effectiveness is a big question mark. In our case, we sincerely feel that we have been able to reach maybe 30% effectiveness when we are working from home in terms of communication links, in terms of decision making, in terms of preparation. Obviously, in our case, production will be only at the shop floors and selling of cars will be in the showrooms and service workshops, which is just not there. When we are looking at maybe engagement of people working from home, I think has been a challenge, and the productivity equally a big challenge. But somewhere perhaps it was a great opportunity to offer our employees the e-modules for various kinds of programs, which they can do it at their flexibility, at their convenience. But to a great extent, you cannot just go on, on learning and development for this longer 40-day period. Perhaps when we are looking at mind share debate, I think I have seen that conflict, whether lives are more important or whether the livelihood is more important. I think government also has been struggling for a balance between this lockdown and this economic activity coming to a standstill and creating a huge problem for temporary workers, contract workers, migrant workers, those who depend on day-to-day earnings, unlike some of us who are very fortunate by the grace of God. And somewhere, perhaps, when we are looking at this disruption, this has disrupted not only the business, but also our professional and social life in just one go. And somewhere, this kind of disruption should be one learning for us to look at the turbulent times in which we are entering now. Maybe next slide, when we are looking at maybe the restart challenges, and we are all talking, we are all hoping that 4th, the lockdown may be lifted. But I think I see a very big problem when we restart. And the biggest will be the Ministry of Human Resources or Health or Home Affairs. Everywhere ICMR, they are releasing these guidelines on social distancing, safety and health of employees coming back to work. And quite detailed kind of description of various kinds of provisions. When we are looking at social distancing itself, it's now confirmed that it will be 1.8 meters between two employees. So seating arrangement in offices, perhaps when we are entering the workplace, to a great extent, when we are looking at maybe kind of thermal temperature readers, maybe we are looking at some perspective that people should be walking with the social distancing all around their workplace. Canteen will be a big challenge, how we are going to handle that. When people are changing shifts, I think there has been compulsorily a 1.5 hour gap provided already, so that there is no crowding at that point of time when the shifts are changing. We are looking at transport facility. And one very practical perspective of people wearing masks for 6, 7, 8 hours for work is not easy. It is very tough. We have done some actual simulations, and it appears very tough because people become very uncomfortable. So somewhere, perhaps when we are looking at this entire perspective, maybe 6 months, 9 months, maybe 1 year, I think we are looking at a dipping productivity and performance level to start with. So 100 may become 60, 100 may become 65, 100 may become 55, but 100 will not remain 100, that is for sure. From the auto industry perspective, maybe I'll touch that separately. Maybe when we are looking at next slide, the crisis in our thinking and in our experience. Ashish, next slide, please. This is impacting different industries differently. Ashish, can I request for the next slide, please? Next one, please. Thank you. When we look at auto industry, maybe we were in any case impacted by last 12 months of degrowth of roughly about 18-20%. And now we are looking at this COVID-19 impact. I think to a great extent on the commercial area network, dealership, showroom, service workshops, it may take a while for us to gradually get back into normal mode. But as when we are looking at the biggest challenge will be supply chain. When we look at maybe the kind of network of tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, tier 3 suppliers, when we are looking at maybe containment zones, we are looking at hotspots, movement of people, movement of material. Some factories may not operate immediately, and we will be heavily dependent on both the commercial area network as well as the suppliers for any auto industry, specifically for our case in Maruti, before we can become functional. So for us to produce cars, for us to sell cars, we will be depending on the suppliers and we'll be depending on the dealer network. But somewhere perhaps when we look at aviation, hospitality and retail, I think they will be immediately getting into cost pressures and maybe cash crunch, maybe somewhere reactions will be to cut overhead costs, including salaries. That is the impression which we get. Maybe the biggest hit will be MSMEs, small and medium industries, and they may not have the financial resources or the strength to cope with this no business avenues for 6 to 8 weeks and maybe longer. But still, they will have their responsibility to pay their employees and take care of the basic welfare perspective. Perhaps when we are looking at global demand, either there will be no demand or there will be low demand, because this impact of this very, very strange kind of maybe pandemic is impacting global destinations somewhere relatively in a bigger way than our own country. So therefore, perhaps when we look at this very weak local demand, this entire perspective of both local and global demand may be low or maybe very weak, will create business sectors, uh, maybe a very big kind of impact in terms of revenues, in terms of maybe the kind of profits, top line, bottom line. And maybe we are looking at no one size fit all kind of a solution. And therefore, the perspective which I talked about in the beginning perhaps will be different for different kind of business sectors, and especially a big challenge for HR. Perhaps when we are looking at the next slide, please, we are looking at this very basic fact of people who are maybe temporary workers and contract workers, outsourced manpower. And there was this big media news about their rushing back to their hometown, maybe without any appropriate transport facility at that point of time when this lockdown was announced. I think all that mess, confusion, but still there has been a huge movement. In our case, 35% people, say for example, out of 15,000, they did moved out back to their hometowns. Return from there, maybe the kind of movement challenges when we see this lifting of the lockdown. We are looking at this physical health concerns. We are in Maruti, we are looking at this last 14 days of body temperature to be one prerequisite for somebody to be able to join back. Maybe we are looking at this principle of caring for yourself and then caring for others. And we are looking at one big challenge in the industry, not the big companies, but I think mostly the medium-sized companies, MSMEs, when we talk of the April 2020 salaries. And there are varying schools of thoughts on this perspective. I believe there has been some announcement that there will be a 3-month with no interest kind of loan available to companies, and which will be coming out of our employees provident fund organization. And then after 3 months, maybe some interest charge of 10.75% or something for companies to be able to pay salaries for April. There are some employers associations which have a view that they would not have the financial backup to pay salaries for April in case of no business, no activity during this lockdown. Somewhere government advisory right from the beginning has been that we must be having this empathy for our workforce, that we should not disturb the salaries or cut the salaries, and we should not downsize people, has been right from the beginning, the government advisory. So there is a kind of dilemma here and a conflict for us to look at going forward. Maybe when we are looking at downsizing concerns, which will be creating a bigger havoc of unemployment, job losses, and possibility of future trend of higher numbers of temp staffing could be one trend, that may be less regular manpower and more temp, maybe gig workforce and maybe contract workers is as the kind of trend which we can foresee right now. Next one, please. When we are looking at the business perspective and when we look at the finance area, the financial management, I think some of the business sectors will be very clearly looking at this cash flow, cash crunch, and funds mobilization issue, especially during this period of lockdown and immediately after this period of lockdown, when the lockdown is lifted. When I look at airlines, aviation industry, we look at maybe this big scare of people not wanting to get into a closed cabin with 300 people and flying 2 hours. Uh, Obviously, consequential, this thing will be tourism, consequential, this thing will be hotels. And somewhere, perhaps, this this kind of industry sector, perhaps they'll be at the moment wondering big way, is with no business activity, no revenues, no income during the lockdown period. Maybe they will have their own challenges, very different than some of us. Maybe restart may take maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. And somewhere I expect that maybe we may touch 30, 40%, or maybe 50% at best, kind of normalcy of business volumes. But I don't think beyond that we can expect much at this point of time. Maybe RBI has announced countermeasures and lending maybe become a bit more easier. But I think it will all be driven by, business assumption and demand factor, because unnecessarily people are not going to borrow to create more burden for themselves, for their businesses. Maybe post-COVID experience from China can be helpful. And we have been in touch with some supplier companies, consulting companies from China. And they have indicated that immediate perspective will be a significant drop in the growth, in the GDP growth, and which will obviously affect revenues and profits of whatever kind of business sector we are talking of. When we look at this globalization perspective, most countries may take longer to recover than us. And therefore, business in India will have the consequential downward impact. So there will be no kind of respite from anywhere in my assessment as of now. Focus would shift towards, therefore, cutting off overheads costs. And maybe it may impact, if there is a reactionary kind of an approach, it may impact people decisions, as it happened during 2006-07 global recession. And somewhere I think we need to be a little conscious, and I'll talk about a few other perspectives related to this. Next slide, please. We are looking at maybe auto industry key challenges is roughly 18% degrowth last financial year, 1920. And we are looking at supply chain as a bigger challenge when we restart. And somewhere perhaps 6 to 9 months for this recovery phase for us to go into normal volumes in auto industry, especially passenger car. And when we look at this transition from BS4 to BS6 fuels, maybe electric cars, there will be further challenge coming in. New players coming from MG Hector, maybe Kia, maybe we are looking at Chinese companies coming in, will create more, complexity. But yes, one silver lining being talked about, that people may prefer maybe used cars, small cars immediately to go in for, rather than public transports, which perhaps will be having this scare with having this threat of social distancing and this deadly virus. And that fear may bring in more people to look at owning their cars. That is one silver lining. Maybe next slide is only I just wanted to highlight is some of the media reports yesterday were highlighting the same issue which I just talked about. Demand creation a major challenge in corona times. Auto stock fall as recovery from COVID-19 crisis looks to be prolonged. Availability of components, as I said, supply chain will be critical to restart. So all this is China companies speed in. They are trying to look at this opportunity coming into the Indian market. Maybe next slide, we are looking at the emergence of the new normal. That is what I wanted to emphasize quickly. Maybe we go to the next slide, Ashish. When we are looking at business outlook over 6 to 12 months, I think a significant drop in GDP growth, maybe 2-3%. IMF has also been talking about it. Other agencies have got the same forecast. Maybe we are looking at this COVID-19 spread impact. Threat may take 6 to 9 months to subside, maybe even 1 year. Maybe we are looking at drivers for business growth would remain very weak, and therefore we'll be entering more into a turbulent phase rather than a normal phase. Maybe relook at costs of business, micro view, maybe detailing, alternates, maybe it's part of the new normal. We are looking at restructuring of business frameworks, methods of doing business. The shared taxi concept of Ola Uber may take a hit, something new we'll have to look at. Maybe globalization will need to be revisited, reviewed, and redefined. What will be the globalization perspective? Digital virtual may replace, obviously, before COVID also, we have been quite convinced, conventional mode of business connect. But now I think work from home and this lockdown has made it really a powerful alternative. So tech and automation perhaps may be part of the new normal. And somewhere we'll have to look at people strategy and processes in the light of this. Maybe the kind of AI use we are talking of, or machine learning and hiring and various kinds of HR processes. Global travel and global meetings perhaps may no longer be a major business need. So maybe we can look at video conferencing is the easiest and safest mode for next 1 year or so. Work from home may become a new paradigm, and it may also impact the office cost, the reality cost, which businesses may like to reconsider. The next one, please. Maybe I think when we are looking at this slide, this is not really post-COVID or COVID-19 related issue. I think we have been looking at for the past couple of years. Emergence of the new normal, when we are looking at digital, when we are looking at maybe a kind of a huge shift into e-commerce kind of platform coming into business environment, maybe startups. We were talking of these three things. Change of nature of work, business environment, the VUCA world, digital disruptions, globalization. When we were also looking at change of workplace, maybe open offices, maybe technology-driven work from home, diversity, posh issues, whistleblower mechanism coming into play at the workplace. And if we're looking at change in workforce, maybe younger people, millennials, maybe 3 or 4 generations working together, maybe the gig workforce. But I think post-COVID, this will become a major reality for HR to look at a significant shift in the HR strategy. The next slide, perhaps quickly, I am looking at this new normal for HR. And when we are looking at maybe the manpower cost, we'll have to review, because at the moment it will be strongly getting into a negative perception and issue for corporates and HR to handle. Challenge for HR will be to handle this crisis first. Maybe look at this, avoiding this reactive kind of decision making. I think better it will be to take a pause post lifting of the lockdown and then do a kind of a deliberation or dialogue or thinking where the board or the CEOs can look at different perspectives. I think China experience is also suggesting that on medium to long-term subjects, a short-term decision should not be taken. That approach should be avoided. And HR, in my thinking, medium to long-term perspective will be better. Maybe looking at somewhere flexibility as the new norm. In HR, I think I have seen we have been quite rigid about certain policies, processes for shelf life of policies being very long. I think somewhere we'll have to look at this flexibility as the new normal going forward. Maybe when we are looking at flexible new employment contracts, we are looking at gig workforce, we are looking at temp manpower rather than asking everybody to join for next 40 years. I think we'll have to look at this big change in our own working. Capability building, perhaps compared to that earlier training and development, in my thinking, will be aligned to the business order, new business skills. Maybe reskilling will be a bigger job. And maybe job rotation for multi-skilling will become the norm, and more effective people, but less number of people. When we are looking at lower fixed pay and greater part of variable pay, this may become a bigger reality going forward. And perhaps one factor, when we have looked at this ratio of lowest to highest paid, it may require a very stern re-look in my thinking. And one perspective I can quickly share with you, in most of the countries, including Europe, US, India, the ratio is indicating a gap of about 400, 500 between the lowest paid and the highest paid. In Japan, it is 24 times. So big learning from Japanese companies, gap between lowest paid to highest paid is just 24 times, 28 times, rather than 400 times, 500 times. I think somewhere we need to relook this perspective. And therefore, I'm emphasizing on this transformation, or the need for us to be open to look at some new perspective innovation while we talk of this flexibility. Next one, Ashish, please. When we are looking at maybe people health, safety and well-being, that may become a top priority in the immediate perspective. Maybe 8 to 12 months, this will dominate our working. And what I realized today, when we started part of our operations at Maruti, this was the biggest challenge which we faced. And we were very, very careful on this. Maybe we can look at higher engagement, so which will lead to higher value add and productivity. So maybe higher empathy with our people. We are looking at work culture interventions. I think globalization may need to be shifted to some new perspective, rather than cut, copy, and paste whatever is the parent company in US or Europe or North Korea or South Korea or China. I think Japan. I think we'll have to look at a customization which works well in our context. And maybe a perspective where whether technology versus people, I think we can look at a high tech with high touch kind of an approach. A balance of both will always be better rather than one extreme or the other extreme. Leadership character, in my thinking, will be tested to the hilt in this kind of crisis situation. Leadership in adversity, maybe with a high focus on communication and direction setting process. Uh, Creating this big kind of clarification how we are going to handle this crisis, so that perhaps to a great extent ambiguity, complexity can lead to transformation for people and can build their morale and motivation. Vision quotient, in my thinking, where we can forecast the future, all the turbulence, all the uncertainty, or maybe the kind of volatility, will be helpful for driving motivation, motivating our people, maybe restructuring the business model. And I think including the conventional manufacturing companies, we'll have to look at multiple lenses. What will not work in future? What will not be relevant? So for staying relevant, using multiple lenses. Maybe when we are looking at business strategy innovation, next slide, please. Somewhere perhaps we'll have to look at, again, flexibility, agility, to retain sustained success in future. And anywhere rigidity is perhaps will be a recipe for disaster. All companies, in my thinking, will have to have a business plan A and an alternative plan B. This will be new normal. We cannot be waiting for some crisis to happen and then we prepare plan B. Now, I think somewhere we'll have to be working with one team which should always work on future business strategies. And somewhere present business plan and operations will be fine, being looked after by 60%, 70%. But I think 30% people will be focusing, some new team should be focusing on long-term business strategy, where they are looking at this plan B also. And maybe I think to a great extent, we are looking at shelf life of products and services may become shorter. So new product development and maybe lead time to market should also shrink. In our case, new cars, for example, at one point of time used to take 6 years, then 4 years. Now we are talking of 2 years. I think this trend is getting more and more part of the new normal. The last slide, perhaps, I just wanted to quickly share with you is, earlier we were all taught and we all were, very much groomed into this concept of being the first or being the best is the only solution. But I think from the global learnings, and now when we see this COVID-19 kind of impact, I think somewhere it is teaching us that the next strategy, I think the benchmark, what we are looking at, being the first or best may not assure success. I think being the second or a rapid follower may lead to success in future. So somewhere this transformational leadership perspective. So perhaps we are a little short on time, but still I would like to quickly address few questions if possible. Otherwise, I'll cover them towards the conclusion when we are finishing this program. Anything, Neeraj, quickly, which I can look at?
Yeah. So, though I've sent it to you, but at the same time, let me read out a couple of questions. If the lockdown continues for another 1 month till 31st of May, what
Yeah.
would be the consequences that India can expect sector-wise? So that's one of the early questions which came in. So, what could be the possible consequences that India can, or India Inc. in particular, can experience?
To a great extent, I think in my thinking, I'm looking at a 50-50 perspective of lifting of the lockdown on 4th of June. 50 is that somewhere we'll be easing out some of the economic activity. So some of the corporates, manufacturing companies, IT, ITS, and we are looking at various kinds of retail sector, we are looking at aviation, will start. But somewhere there will be restrictions. So it will not be a going full throttle from 4th of May. However, when we are looking at the past 30 days, and we'll be completing 40 days by the time we reach 41 days by the time we reach maybe 4th of May, I think somewhere it has taught us one learning is that if we cannot perform, then we can plan and prepare very well. And to some extent in our company, what we have done is, if we were facing this reality of the lockdown where we cannot, uh, you know, literally produce cars and sell cars, we thought that let us then plan and prepare for the future. Second part is that balancing, perhaps looking at cost, balancing the overheads and looking at recovery in the subsequent part of the year could be another practical perspective to look at. Because when we are looking at this global pandemic and the kind of scare and kind of dangerous threat of transmission of this virus, I think at the moment, the bigger priority for the country is to save lives of people from this pandemic. And then we will, in any case, look at recovering back our economic activity. So at the moment, the priority is saving life. But balancing may take a little backseat, but perhaps slowly it may start 50-50 in my thinking.
Thank you. Sir, one of the other questions is regarding the social impact, because we have had a big immigration, internal migration problem which has occurred due to the COVID thing. And a lot of people who are employed in larger cities and in particular with larger manufacturers and all have faced this trauma. So how do we intend to foolproof that kind of a social challenge for the future, given our experience with this crisis?
To be very frank, none of us will have a kind of ready answers on some of these issues. I was reading one very small Twitter remark from one of the female columnists. I think she mentioned that if we continue this lockdown and social distancing, we may develop this social habit of staying aloof, of becoming more selfish,
Right,
or
right,
becoming only concerned with me, myself, and my kid and my immediate family, my wife or something.
right,
So
right.
there are various perspectives. But in my thinking, my submission to all the people who are part of this e-dialogue today is that let us not jump to these kinds of threats or these kinds of assumptions or negative perceptions. I think initial part, the threat will dominate maybe next 6 months. When I talk of travel, I am talking of domestic travel, I am talking of rail travel, I am talking of public transport travel. Uh, Maybe global travel will be a big hit because there will be this threat, this is scare. But I think this part of social structure for our country, still fortunately, will have this strength to come back to normal just like a rubber comes back to normal when you stretch and then leave it back. But it may be a gradual process, and people who were coming from different kind of geographical points to certain central points, metros to work in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai. I think restoring confidence may take a little effort from the corporates, which, say, for example, in case of Maruti, we are very conscious of this fact, not only for managerial manpower, but also for our shop floor associates. So we are creating that comfort, creating that assurance, creating that belongingness back to the company. But yes, it will take a little bit of time.
One last question that I'll take, Mr. Siddiqui, is that since you represent one of the largest manufacturing companies, how do you think that going forward after the crisis is finally over, would you be able to contribute to employment generation in the MSME sector, where a lot of people are employed traditionally, and how could you would be able to front integrate to the network of your dealers and distributors and all of that? So how do you address the larger employment question?
When normally when we see auto industry, so there is one principle which is very clearly defined, is that we roll out one car and sell one car, and it will create employment for 7 people.
Right.
So when we are looking at Maruti touching about 1.4, 1.5 million kind of annual sales, and we are looking at our massive supply chain network and dealer network into the country, I think when we are looking at next 6 to 12 months, we are looking at a gradual recovery back to normal. Also, prior to this COVID-19 crisis, as I said, almost 12 months we have faced this degrowth, low economic kind of perspective, low market segments. So industry ended somewhere around minus 18% this year. 27.75 lakhs cars were sold in India compared to previous year 18-19, where it was 33.35 lakhs or something. So minus 18%. So when we are looking at 50% share of Maruti, in that perspective, we are looking at going back into normal growth, maybe single digit or maybe even optimistically double digit in the next financial year, which is 21-22, hopefully. With that kind of push, I think when we look at our supply chain, we look at tier 1 companies, we look at tier 2 companies, then we look at tier 3 companies, where MSMEs come in a big number. And somewhere when this kind of volume growth, including exports for Maruti or for auto industry per se, will become a bigger reality as the time passes. It may take a little longer cycle to recover, but I think we'll be back into generating that kind of potential for employment at across levels in terms of manufacturing sector. And I'm sure that perhaps government also looks at automotive industry in a very critical way from that perspective. So I'm sure perhaps time will be there, but I think we'll bounce back to normal.
Many thanks, Mr. Siddiqui. I think that was a very, very interesting start to the deliberations today. In fact, it will not be out of place to mention that these series of programs are being supported by BML Munjal University as the knowledge partner of AIMA for these initiatives. Thank you so much. I would request you to introduce the next speaker and hand it over to him.
Right. Thank you, Neeraj. So very happy to welcome Mr. A. Sudhakar from Dabur. And I think as we know Sudhakar long years, almost 40 years for his career in HR, and a real good thought leader coming from a very varied background, something like Ranbaxy, a key role he has played, various kinds of contributions in the HR function, Ernst & Young, and maybe Dabur last 17 years. So Sudhakar has been last 17 years in Dabur, and I have been last 17 years in Maruti. That is one common point as well for two of us. Maybe when we look at his overall background, I thought that perhaps Sudhakar can bring the FMCG perspective in a great way while I talk of automotive. And in that perspective, perhaps he will share his experience. Sudhakar, welcome, and all yours.
Thank you, Sakleen. Good afternoon to everybody. Sakleen has already painted the picture with regard to what we are in. I don't want to spend much time on the tough business environment we're in, but some statistics I thought I must tell you. FICCI had done a survey of approximately 380 companies across various sectors. The numbers, some of the components which I saw, one is in terms of business outlook. Reduction in sales, almost 70% of the companies feel there 20% or more sales decline in the coming year, that is 2021. That is a big negative for us. Second, in terms of cost optimization, almost 80% feel there will be at least 10% cost optimization across companies. That means there will be pressure on, needless to say, HR. Third is the job creation. Again, it's a HR issue. Almost 70% of the companies very clearly say there will be a minimum of 5% reduction of employability, of employment of people, minimum 5%. So you just imagine these 380 companies, how many employees are there? Looking at a 5% decline in employment in the financial year of 2021, it's both the cost issue and the number of employment issue. And the another important thing, what Sakleen also covered it, how long this could continue. 90% of the companies feel it will be 6 months plus. Frankly, it's nobody can guess it, but their assumption is nothing will normalize before 6 months. That's what is, I think, almost 20%. Now, there are different scenarios with regard to the downturn and when there is an uptick, it will happen. There is a V-shaped recovery. They say that, look, everything will go down. Maybe in another quarter or so, everything will just come up like what it happened in 2008 or so, or maybe demonetization or some other problems we had. Some theory says, no, it will not be V, it will be U. That means the slowdown will continue much more time. As Sakleen said, some theories are that show the lockdown may not be lifted on 3rd May. If that is the case, then the slowdown will go to some more months, maybe quarter 2, and then there will be U. This will again, there will be jump in the consumption. But there is another scary picture. There is a L-shaped recovery, which that means the downturn could continue maybe to the even the first quarter of 2021-22. So that's a scenario which these are all theories based on various facts, which they are like what everybody is projecting. GDP growth should be 1.8% or 2%, etc., etc. These are the different theories. Naturally, these are guidelines as to see how HR can play a role if there is an eventuality of an alphabet of V, U, or L. What should be our response? And our preparedness is what's the plan which is there. So if that is the case, as a business partner, what is that we need to respond is something. I thought let me cover 2-3 aspects of flexibility, openness, and innovation. And also as a HR team, what we can do to support the business. That's the thing. Now, when you talk about flexibility, if you look at the human resource planning, which all of us are experts in doing for our companies, always we thought, how many people I need to add in the next financial year, and how much growth I need to provide for people, what type of promotions I need to do, what type of increments I must do, and how many layers I must create. That has been the whole thing. And I think now there may be a complete rethinking with regard to HR planning. We might have to relook at, look here, how many full-timers I can have, how much should be the percentage of my big gig workforce, and what activities I can outsource. Because the situation what we are in today, frankly, in my 40 years of service, I've never seen. And I was trying to read, was this problem there in the World War I and World War II? Frankly, it did not affect many of the businesses. There was, as it is, business were different. It did not affect, because here, now when you are scared of moving out of your house, now what business you can think of? And frankly, Everybody is in this dilemma. So that being the case, if you start thinking of a manpower structure where I will add people, I will go to the campuses like this, I will have full-timers all the time, frankly, you are preparing some problem in the company. Now, second thing is in terms of strategic plans. Frankly, I come from Dabur. From 2003, we happened to prepare our strategic plan for 4 years. That means at the beginning of that first year, we were planning that what would be my revenue and profitability in the 4th year. So this was the trend till 2018. Then we saw the vagaries of business. We said 4 years is too long a period of time. Now let us plan annual plans. That means you prepare annual plan, you structure your bonuses, stock options, etc., etc. Frankly, from 4 we have come to 1. Now, if you ask me what will be our plan, first quarter we are already in. We don't know what is the first quarter plan. It means from 4 years we have come to 1 year, and from 1 year we have come to quarters. If you ask me, yesterday I was in a webinar with one of our senior consulting companies. That person tells us that, look here, the sales and operational planning, which normally happens in FMCG, because each FMCG company has hundreds and hundreds of products, and they have to be distributed over 6 million outlets in the country, with the distributors maybe 3,000, 4,000. So that being the case, every company plans for sales and operation planning with the operations team, the sales team, marketing team, etc., etc. That is for, we used to do month 1 and month 2, M1, M2. Now that gentleman yesterday tells me they are doing S&OP every 2 days. Not 3 days, every 2 days they are conducting S&OP for one FMCG company. This is the guidance which we got yesterday. Look here, things are so uncertain that you talk about M1, M2, that's all, I think we might have to forget that M1, M2 concept for maybe, we don't know how many quarters. That's the type of change which is happening on the business front. If that is the case, what is it that, we as a HR need to respond? The first point which I felt is that, in terms of the organization structure, we need to create a flexible structure and evaluate all layers of supervisory levels which we got in the organization. Frankly, over a period of time, we Indians have created multi-layer organizations, both for the motivation levels of people and also our own ability or inability to have too many supervisory levels. We want, until unless somebody tells me what I need to do, I will not do my work. So there is a supervisory layer. So second level. So like that, we created from a assistant manager to deputy manager to additional manager to manager, senior manager, like we have created. Frankly, it applies to every organization, including ours. It's a reality. But that structure, that organization structure, frankly, we all as HR professionals have to relook. And we need to see, why do I need to create so many layers in my organization? And how can I empower people so that the number of supervisory roles can be reduced, still with the results which are there. Now, another point which Shalini also talked about, you see, we always felt, there are jobs which are very specialized. So we need to have specialists for everything. And naturally, when there is a specialist, then there are some generalists which keeps up, and that's how you keep structuring in an organization, whether it is an R&D or a marketing. For example, in marketing, you have an activation person, you have an innovation person. That means innovation person will only think what I should launch. Activation person will take the product and then activate it in the marketplace. So these are all the roles which we have created. On top of it, we have marketing services, which will have market research. We'll have media planning, media buying, like that. You have a lot of levels we have created over a period of time, right or wrong, because we felt in India salaries are reasonable, we can always employ. But the same is not the case in many organizations. Now things have to be completely relooked at, where you need to think that, can I have the concept of multi-skilling and retooling our organizations to a large extent. And it is not that these things are possible to do in a short time, but this sometimes, crisis tells us what needs to be done much faster than what would have normally done. But not for the COVID-18, frankly, nobody will be talking about all these concepts, because today COVID-19 is here and now and hitting us very badly. There has to be a response from HR. This could be one of the responses. Now, next is, if you look at attendance, we are all used to 100% people coming to the companies, working, barring some IT companies. But frankly, even if the lockdown is lifted on 4th of May, having 100% attendance in the offices or factories, frankly, it's a dream. So there will be a concept of work from home, work from office. Either government will regulate, look here, in an organization, you cannot have more than 30% people because of the social distancing, or people say that, look here, we are scared to come out of it, we will not come. If that being the case, you need to see what could be a ratio of work from home, work from office. That flexibility you need to create so that there is a sort of an engagement of employees for them to come to the office. Frankly, if you don't create that, you might lose some good employees, and that's a concept which you don't want. So it's a ratio of work from home, work from office, that is WFO and WFH. Lot of acronyms come up. It's an important concept as part of the flexibility we need to look at. The next point is, whenever crisis comes, it's very important how to our employees.
I think that's a loss of connection at Sudhakar's end.
Yeah.
We'll just, so he's back. Yeah.
Is okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please go ahead, Sudhakar, go ahead. So some turbulence for Sudhakar at his home.
Bad connection at his end.
Yeah, bad connection. So we were talking of turbulence, so there is some turbulence there in any case.
Right. We'll wait for him.
I hope he connects back.
Yeah, I think he's connecting back. Maybe we can go without video from him, because in certain parts, either the video.
But audio also is not working.
Seems like. Yeah, so he's reconnecting. Yeah. Yeah, he's there. So Sudhakar, you need to unmute yourself. Yeah, it's fine now. Yeah.
It's okay?
Yeah,
fine. Yeah, I think that there's some problem with the technology. Yeah. So that's the, in terms of, openness, that, these difficult circumstances, we need to communicate to employees and stakeholders on a constant basis. So practically every week there are 2-3 communications from the CEO, HR head, 99% inquiring about the employee, not about the business. And then, of course, there is alongside, there will be what are the steps we are taking with regard to business. That's a separate issue. So that way, you are able to engage employees, because it's a big problem is with regard to the health and mental health of people in this area. That's one thing which constantly which we need to do. Another point which can I just hold it? I think is Neeraj, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Sudhakar,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah. So then that the basic purpose of this communication is that, how can you keep a balance between the panic and the actual transfer? See, bulk of the times, if you have these problems, panic sets in, maybe the good employees will leave or the employees stay, but demotivated. So all these things are the things which, constantly one needs to look at in what way we can sort of, prevent over a period of time. So that's on the recruitment and selection process. I think, use of technology is something which we always recommend. And that's what, whether it's a virtual walkthrough, virtual videos, then even onboarding also, a lot of these things because of openness which is coming in. And next point is about the health. See, as it is, all of us have been providing medical insurance and medical checkups to the employees. But now going forward, we are evaluating in terms of medical support to the employees, not just physical checkups, physical health. It's even to the mental health also, because a lot of things sometimes, when you are sitting at home for a month, and sometimes some people are able to work from home. If there is a person who is involved mostly in production, or a person who is involved in sales, the person, if he doesn't go out of the house from his own perspective. So those are things which we thought we should do. That's the change in role of HR with regard to health, which we need to do. Now, on the innovation front, I think we have been using technology quite a lot on recruitment and selection. And I think going forward, much more digitization is happening on recruitment and selection. And same is the case with onboarding as well L&D. One important thing which HR has to play a very key role is the costs. Because whether it is an FMCG company or an IT company, there is a ratio of our revenues to the sales, maybe 7%, maybe 10%, maybe 15%. The important thing is everybody is looking at big costs. Its question is, how can we manage over a period of time that as a HR part, look here, how can we contribute, whether you do the postponements of increments, promotions, whatever, or you want to, any new recruitment which you want to plan, you want to postpone, those are all things which are possible for each company. And other costs relate to travel, then learning and development, holding of conferences. Frankly, every cost item on this HR needs to be relooked at over a period of this time. Then in terms of performance management, I was reading one very funny thing today. Haryana government is saying that, in the performance appraisal, one should talk about the hygiene in the office. So now government is entering into domains which frankly is very surprising. So that's the type of thing which are so naturally, when you talk about PMS, you might have a column for hygiene. Is he a smoker? Is maintaining social distancing? The proper hygiene things, whether hand wash, etc. are being followed or not. These are funny things which are coming, unfortunately. Now, in terms of, to summarize the whole thing, so that we have some time, what is very, very crucial to face this particular thing. So in that, one is how balance between business imperatives and the people imperatives. See, it is not always possible that, look here, I will only talk about business, I don't talk about people, or vice versa. So you need to see what balance I can prepare in such a way that, look here, I need to cut costs, I know it, but at the same time, I can't cut costs so bare bones that sustainability of business is difficult. So that's the thing. That is where HR has to understand the business, or try to understand the business, or seek help from somebody who can explain to them about the business imperative. Because in business also, there are some costs which you can't prevent. Now in HR, now you need to see how can we understand the business. Look here, this much I can contribute from HR with regard to cost management in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. This is how I can participate. Now, naturally, yesterday we were talking to one of the persons there, and they said, look here, we used to have the luxury of having executive coaches, luxury of hiring such consultants for hiring. Now, they as a company, they say, look here, it's important for us to evaluate, can I coach internally so that, train the trainer route, our employees can become coaches. Number one. Number two, can I insource recruitment, which I had outsourced? Can I move from search to selection with regard to the recruitments? So different companies are thinking different options to ensure, as a HR, what can we contribute to overall cost management in this crisis situation is what's the point. Digitization, frankly, there is no escape for us without digitization. And the other day we were talking about digitization. I think, everybody was saying whether CEO is responsible, HR head is responsible, or CTO is responsible for digitization. Today, COVID-19 is responsible for digitization. So that's there. And health and hygiene talk. And but one thing I must tell you, there are a lot of regulatory aspects, frankly, although a lot of guidelines are being issued, nobody is clear about the guidelines, whether it is engagement on the labor side, now whether you can cut salaries, what will happen to any other thing. Frankly, each district magistrate is interpreting the rules the way he or she likes. So that's a challenge for HR to understand and convince them, look here, the intent of a circular is this. So that's where I think regulatory aspects we need to do. And that is the reason, even the government is trying to see to expedite the implementation of different labor codes, even through ordinance. Although one of the codes has been approved by the parliament, but never notified. But now they are looking at if they can bring about an ordinance to implement those 4 labor codes. So these are some of, one thing is that, we always feel that, every one of us have leadership competencies in the company for different levels. But one competence which we feel managing crisis is one competency, frankly, we need to reevaluate in our performance appraisals. And now how can we imbibe that particular competency in our employees only? But all this, in my view, personal view, and after talking to several consulting friends as well as seniors, it's a long haul. Please remember, it is not going to be a 1 quarter phenomenon. Now, people might talk about the V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, and L-shaped recovery. According to me, they are just another 3 alphabets. It's not that I want to be pessimistic, but we as HR professionals need to be realistic, and we have faced such problems in the past and countered them. And I'm sure with the combined effort, intelligence of all HR professionals, they'll be able to support the business to get over this, minimize the impact of the COVID-19 on our business through our various initiatives, both the strategic and operational. Thank you very much.
So
Thank you, Sudhakar. Thank you.
So Sudhakar, my IT guy tells me that if you shut off your video for a while, I think you would be at least heard, because the 2 or 3 questions that I need to ask, I mean, you should at least be heard. So if you could shut off your video, your bandwidth problem would be solved, he tells me.
I just shut it.
Yeah, please, because we have been encountering these issues. Yeah, okay. So I'll directly take off a few questions that we have received during the session. So one thing, since you come from a background which is largely FMCG, the production of the products could be kind of be done in the rural areas, in smaller cities and all. People are keen to understand that whether FMCG companies and other such companies would be taking such initiatives to disperse their production to smaller towns and cities, so that in face of another crisis, maybe sometime down the line, we overcome lesser problems of migration. Again, migration is an issue, social issue. So we're trying to figure out whether we can decongest our cities and move production to the smaller places.
Yeah, if you see, Neeraj,
Yeah.
except our main factory in Saibabad, which is in a way Delhi, this was set up in 1974 when actually this place was outside municipal limits.
Okay, right.
So, barring that, practically our main factories, whether it is Baddi, Rudrapur, Tejpur, Pitampur, Alwar, Nevai near Jaipur, all of them are mostly in the rural areas.
Right.
Even Nevai also, it is outside municipal limits of Jaipur. About 60 kilometers, like that, see, even when we set up our factory in Rudrapur in Uttarakhand, frankly, we were the second factory in the entire area of Rudrapur.
Okay.
Today, there are hundreds of factories are there. So our main thing is that, we never were charmed by that we should have a factory in only urban areas. Because we are not a product which is of mostly urban centric. We are a product primarily almost 50% of our revenues. So we never felt important. That's not a priority, nor even today also our latest factory in Tejpur, which is almost 60-70 kilometers from Guwahati.
Oh, okay.
And that is the reason today I am able to run my factory in Tejpur.
Okay, fine.
Had it been in Guwahati, frankly, I would have never run a factory.
Right, that's true. In fact, one other question which is coming up is that what are the kind of recruitment patterns? Do we see the recruitment patterns being altered? Do we see a different kind of recruitment strategies for companies post-COVID? Do we see any change in that?
Yeah, one is, as I said, use of technology, Neeraj. We are able to onboard 23 trainees last week, completely virtual.
Okay.
So that is one thing with regard to trainees. Coming to full-time employees, a lot of our interviews, assessments, all are happening online in the past 20 days.
Okay.
And in fact, we have onboarded 3 people in the last 20 days virtually. And same thing, I think, we used to do for our only frontline when our normal operations were on. And we need to think that, we can extend that to even to senior levels.
Okay. So, see, in another question, there is a belief that FMCG and pharma sectors are the 2 sectors which have majorly benefited out of COVID. So how do you see, that impacting the growth of these companies from here on? Would the pattern of the products, the things that they offer, are likely to change? Would we talk about more hygiene products, which will have a center stage for most of the FMCG companies? How can it be one of the main employment drivers in the post-COVID-19 scenario?
Yeah, see, frankly, it is not that FMCG and pharma companies are not affected by the COVID-19. The government might allow manufacture, Neeraj, but the fact of the matter is, even if I manufacture a product in, say, in Tejpur or Baddi or Rudrapur, how do I transport that product? So the entire transport network was affected. Even for production, almost 20-25% people are from the available manpower which is there in factories, and bulk of them had gone away. So yes, we did do automation in some areas, and we also launched products in a short span of 5 days, like sanitizers, both in India, in South Africa, in Dubai, in Egypt, in Nigeria. We have launched the product because these are all the things which we have the capability, and we launched globally these products. And the basic point is that the raw material procurement, then the transportation, and the entire distribution network is in India. Still, it is primitive. The modern trade, the so-called big bazaars of the world, only contribute to 5 to 8% of the revenues for any FMCG company. 90% is, again, mom and pop stores. That is the one way, in a way, mainstay for FMCG companies today, because the groceries, they worked very well. but e-commerce completely shut. Then all the malls are shut. So it's a even if you have a product, even if the government allows you to produce the product, but you can't distribute it. So that's why you are affected. Yes, we might be the first ones to come back to the normalcy.
Okay. One last question, Sudhakar, though not very specific to your session. I think that is something that all the speakers, I'd request them to answer. Do we see from here deglobalization of the world?
It could be a reverse also. For
Reverse
example,
globalization.
reverse also. Reverse, for example, we might have a lot of benefits out of China problem.
Oh,
Lot of global companies are sending us inquiries about various products which they are currently manufacturing in China.
okay.
And the pharma companies are approaching the government that APIs be manufactured more in India as compared to import from China. So there are multiple things which are happening globally.
Right, right.
Well, I think, Neeraj, this is a very important question. Whoever has asked, I must compliment the person, because I think when we look at this big hit on globalization, and when we look at the post-COVID recovery path, 6 to 9 months or maybe 1 year, I think focus will be on developing rural markets bigger way. Focus will be on localization.
Yeah, right.
And to a great extent, focus will be on localization, not globalization, localization. I think local customization will become the name of the game. Perhaps when we are looking at tier 2, tier 3 cities, they will gain in focus.
Yeah,
And one simple example, not relevant to COVID-19, 2003, 2004, when I joined Maruti, our rural sales were contributing 1.5%, 2% to the national sales. 2005-6, we started a very sharp focus on rural markets. And today, 2005 to 20, rural markets are contributing 32% to national sales of
wow.
Maruti. So when
That's
something happens in the big urban cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai, our rural market supports with the kind of capability of buying cars, although small cars, but buying cars. So that balancing, I think, is extremely critical. Now, post COVID-19, I think it will be perforced. This focus will be shifting from globalization in a reverse way. And perhaps we'll have to look at local talent. We'll have to look at localization. We'll have to look at local markets. We'll have to look at rural markets as the next destination for most businesses.
Thank you. On that note, Sudhakar, thank you so much. I think that was a very interesting session.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We'd not stop here because we are little ahead of behind time, and also we already have Mr. Dwarakanath with us. So I would basically request Mr. Siddiqui to introduce and welcome Mr. Dwarakanath. Just to reiterate, this special webinar series is being sponsored as a knowledge partner by BML Munjal University. Thank you so much, dear partners. Over to you, Mr. Siddiqui, to introduce Mr. Dwarakanath.
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj. Dwarka, welcome. Very, very happy that you have been able to make it in spite of your busy preoccupations. And
Thank
I
you.
am very happy to introduce Mr. P. Dwarkanath, although he doesn't require any introduction in our community in any case. I think with this kind of thought leadership, Dwarka being associated with GSK for a long career of maybe 35 years plus, and reaching to this coveted position of being chairman of the board, also had a great stint, or continuing to have that stint with the Max Group, earlier heading their entire corporate HR function, and then being a strategic advisor to the top management and the board. I think with Dwarka, perhaps he has been a mentor to many of us in the HR journey. And somewhere, perhaps when I look at this overall HR and business perspective, especially the top leadership perspective, that is what my request to Dwarka was, that perhaps he will share a different kind of a view on the top leadership and also the business and HR combination. Dwarka, we have started 3 o'clock. Then I talked of basically the macro, both on the business and the kind of HR challenges which we are likely to face. I think we talked of the new normal, what we are going to be now experiencing, maybe the kind of hit on the top lines, bottom lines, So what will be the way forward? Some perspective. More specifically, Sudhakar talked about specific HR shift which is required. And now perhaps we'll be looking at from your side, maybe that transformation, that change, what perhaps you may like to talk of your career, and then perhaps move on to Shalini. So please, all yours, Sudhakar.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Saklin. Good afternoon, and thanks to IMA and Neeraj for organizing this and for inviting me. My apologies, I couldn't join the earlier session, so I didn't have the benefit of listening Saklin or Mr. Sudhakar. But having said that, I will try, as Saklin said, I will try to focus on the more at the transformation change, how you can use it as a game changer, what is the positivity versus authenticity, and so on. But if there is any repetition by any chance, please pardon me, and I'll be happy to take at the end any questions has been put to. As everybody would have said it, I think one of the challenge, this is no longer a HR challenge. This is totally a global challenge. Because this is not something to do with only health crisis, but this will imminently change the global economic order. So that is where it requires, we talked about the VUCA world and so on. This is much more than the VUCA world. If you want to aptly describe, this is exactly the VUCA world we are in. It is not the World War II which created that VUCA word, but this is what is creating now. We are experiencing it. We talked about the VUCA world, but we never experienced. Some of you who have faced little bit of crisis, be it a lockdown, be it an agitation, be it a violence, be it anything else, but we have not seen this sort of a dimension, not only to a particular country or a district or a state, but the entire globally this pandemic has created. But having said that, what is the biggest challenge? When I said business challenge, I heard partly what Sudhakar has said. I reinforce it, and and the comments made by Saklin in the beginning of this session. This is becoming a business challenge for everybody. When you're talking about the business challenge, what is the challenge? It is nothing to do only with HR, but HR has to play a very critical role. If I see it from that angle and see the business challenge, how do you balance lives and livelihoods? I mean, this is the biggest thing which you have at at one end of the spectrum, as the board, as the chair, or anyone else for that matter, as a CXO, just wearing a multiple caps, and all of us have. It is not just looking only from people angle. I think, how do you protect the safety and the health of the people? At the same time, how do you make the livelihood happen? How the economic activity goes on? This is the biggest challenge we have. This is not just balancing work-life, it is not a question of life integration, but this is something beyond that in order to do this. This is where I said this challenge is something, a transformation change in its typical classical way. It is not confined to a particular war zone. It is confined to all over base, wherever the humanity exists, which exists right from the Iceland, Antarctica to Arctic. So having said this, this is where I think, I was just attending a session by Dr. Rajiv Kumar and Niti Yogi. It's very important. He said one thing which is relevant to us, as the change is constant, change is dynamic. If you look at, what happened, then you will get very depressed and disappointed. I think, everything sounds negative at this stage. You talk about the liquidity, talked about the solvency, talked about the job crisis, business models, everything will go for a 6. But having said this, I think the way perhaps to do it, I think, somebody has coined it. I think it's McKinsey. It's very nice to see it is no longer normal. It's a new normal. And they've gone to the new normal will start when you post-COVID or currently, but once the lockdown is lifted, but it is the next normal. I think so. We are going through these phases without realizing it's going through. What it was in the early months of March is very different at the end of the March. If you see, most of us have changed the business models trying to address them. So it is something to do with the globe as well as the business across. So in adjusting to the new abnormal, we are learning new habits and skills that we should not unlearn. I think this is where I said what we go through, the transformation change, it is not only the physical safety and comfort, but mental strength and the emotional aspects of it, which are very important. We don't realize everybody is not to remote working. Now everybody is switching to remote working. They are not only adopting, but to adapt to this. So it is not a question of aptitude. It is also the question of your attitude, which makes a difference. So in this context, as a what you start, I think it's important. There's no point in just saying HR has to play a role. HR has to play a role because they have to balance between the employees and the businesses and help in the business continuity plan, at the same time take care of the health and safety. So this is where the concept of SARA comes in. This is a shock and surprise to many. There is an anger and annoyance. There is a rejection, and there is an element of repent. But it is where the SAR, AH will come, acceptance and help. So if you look at positively, we have to convert this threat into an opportunity, as Sudhakar has alluded, as Sakleen Bhai has said it, why can't India progress more on Make India concept, and Swachh Bharat is become a Swatantra Bharat. There are many other things which we can take it, which we did not pay attention, but we can need to pay it. So coming on this aspect, I think it's interesting to see, while many people are adjusting to this remote working, by virtue of which you are giving more delegation and power. At the same time, I hear some of the surveys are saying there is a isolation. There are people who feel they always mingle with people, do it wherever it's possible. They find suddenly they are isolated, and that touch with people, except on a remote basis, is happening. But they always love to be in action. It is gone. And secondly, there is an anxiety syndrome, and seeing apart from the health of their and their families, also what is happens to them after the lockdown is lifted, whether I will retain my job or will not retain. This is something, which is bothering many, whether business models change, whether, am I required after this? Will the, I know some of the sectors have very badly impacted. I think I'm sure that Sakleen would have covered it. I don't want to repeat it, but like hospitality, tourism, civil aviation, and couple of things have gone for really six. Okay, pharma, FMCG is somewhere in between, but there are others who are ITES, enabled services. For example, many of these web access and Zeos have had a field day. So, how do you make this business models agile? So the first submission I would like to make is, this is something, which we need to recognize as the CXOs, as the business leaders, that it is no longer, this is going to be the same business models, business trajectories, and the process and systems. This will undergo a seesaw change. Just to take an example, there are, I think, this is not in one phase. I would submit there is 5 phases here. The first phase, what we are talking about is, without realizing, which are going through it, is the resolve. How do you assess the current depth? It is like an elephant with a blind man sitting in a room, trying to figure out how elephant looks like that. We don't know exactly. We are trying to know. We didn't know anything in the mid-March, but we know something more. We're learning from other neighboring countries and other global countries what's happening in the Europe and US, but we are not fully aware of it. So the first, and there are 5 stages I submit. The first stage is what we call the resolve. This is where we see how we try to address these issues in terms of understanding assess the current situation before we move further. The second stage is the resilience. Resilience is something to do once we're trying to do it. I mean, who thought that automobile industry would, some of them are cooperating to do the need of our ventilators, and who thought that India Post is trying to take personal protective equipment since they don't have any mails to distribute. Similarly, can you imagine a strategic alliance between two competitors like GSK and Sanofi, who are leading players in the field of vaccines, number 1 and number 3. They are coming together, which never would have happened. So just to give a point, there is an element of collaboration among the most strategic rivals when it comes to the global cause. So the whole business models, what we are thinking, I'm not saying everything go for a 6. It will undergo not only from new normal to next normal. That is going to be so normal, new normal, and next normal. So what is it? And second aspect which I want to bring here is when you're talking about the agility in the models and the way it is, it will move on. One of the aspects, which will come into play very clearly is that innovation. I think, people, there are some companies to address the stress and anxiety isolation syndrome. I can just say this is all in public knowledge. There may be some more, I don't know. For example, what Procter & Gamble is doing globally, they've created a help desk, they've created a counselors. This counseling, Jacqueline Bhai, is not only meant for the employees, families, and the supporting key stakeholders to take care of it. I mean, you may say, why do you need a counselor? I think mental health, apart from physical health, has become an important aspect because people are going through this, what I call the syndrome called SARA. So this is one aspect, which we need to bear in mind. I mean, so is Procter & Gamble. I heard Genpact is doing, and definitely Microsoft is doing. People are following different models, and then there is a scope for the disruption has led to innovations. How people are innovating various models in this time of the need of the hour to make it move forward in terms of doing it. This is where I come to the point. This has to start from the top. If it is in the board level, if you don't drive it, the CEO, MD, and the CXOs will not take it to different levels. Everyone should talk about one kind of style of leadership at this hour. What is it employees or stakeholders are looking for? Trust, credibility, and authenticity. This is where the authenticity leadership is very important in trying to bring this transformation change. There will be a lot of resistance to bring changes, but this is where it is inevitable because the global economic order will go through it, and this will create much more challenges to the people. So this is where the first point which I was talking about, the 5 stages. First is the resolve, assess the depth and try to take actions. Second one is the resilience. I think this is where the economic activity is pulled down. How do you do the liquidity, solvency? As a business leaders, as a HR leader, HR cannot say we don't know about the economics, we don't know about the financial. I think they also have to play a role. Maybe I just want to give it very at the macro level. The way you're thinking about your pay mixes, business models relating to performance, everything may undergo a change to a large extent. Think differently. There may be more variable pay. There may be more reward and recognition. One of the aspects here I want to say here is we didn't realize so far there are many people who are critical to the organization, but we never respected them the way they should be respected. For example, how important the courier who brings your milk basket, only I have realized now. At the same time, there are being associated for many years with the healthcare industry and the hospitals, how important the hospital health workers are important. It is not only the doctors, but many other paramedical forces, be it ambulance, be it nurses, be it the lab technicians, how important it is. We did not recognize many of them all these years. I think this has given a lot of thought to look at our systems and the recognition. Every recognition need not be in terms of the rewards. I think, they are the warriors and the heroes. Just a pat in time a stroke in at the right time would help it, what I call the psychic income. Apart from recognizing them in a very fitting manner, whatever the choice is, but I think we need to talk about encouraging these people, motivating. This would give me a doubt: our job evaluations are correct? Our approach is correct? Is there any thinking in the mindset? What is essential staff or what is critical talent? We were thinking differently, but now we started thinking in a much more innovative way to make this happen. The third bit which I would like to submit here is the return. I think, it's one is now assess it, what is the impact, how do you start the businesses when they lock down. But I just want to tell you here from my experiences, I think it's important as a business leader, as a responsible person in a board. You see, it is people have been permitted, some of the industries during this period of lockdown, to go and work. But you need to understand the psyche of the people. There are many workers who are very loyal, dutiful, sincere, but they do not want to do it at this stage because they're out of anxiety, out of scare that they get infected. So it is not an easy proposition for the business leaders to drive them. The business wants the productivity, the employees want the earnings, but this is a balance to it. There are many companies who have been given permission, but they could not get the required manpower. This is not something you can quote a rule book at this stage and say, "Book, we are giving an order," unless it is a blatant disobedience or willful insubordination. So these are sensitivities which we're going through. When you go into the return aspect, this will be further in terms of social distancing norms, in terms of hygiene factors, especially in some of the industries like food and health industries. How do you manage to happen is something, which is a big challenge. So what I'm trying to submit is here, there are many things apart from HR processes, systems, which as a businesses, which will undergo and requires a lot of changes to address the new normal and the next normal. The fourth bit, before I conclude, I got quickly two more points. The fourth bit which I would like to submit is when you're talking about resolve, resiliences, as well as in terms of return, how do you reimagine? This is where the innovation, creativity of the people would come in. And before we do that, when you go into return stage, the authenticity of a leadership will be really tested. It is not you walk the talk. You can say many things. I think the first thing as a business leader will try to do is, look, cut the cost of people, stop the training, stop hiring, all this. I'm not saying, it is an economic models of each company and the business, but this is where it is not just the HR. As a business leaders, as a board, you need to have some thinking, some outlook on this, how we run it. I can't give, there's no one size fits all. It depends on many factors, how the government supports, how the private industry takes it, what stimulus they get. There are many other factors. But one thing I would say, I want to recall the value system of GSK. Everyone committed, everyone contributing. I think I want to emphasize this fact. This has been said many years ago. This is where you see what I call the leadership style should be inclusive, empathetic, at the same time authentic, what you say, credible, but at the same time you need to have the bandwidth to Mali to Malik. I think, how do you take care of your gardener or a gateman to the chairman of the company? You need to have the bandwidth. This is not just the HR alone. HR can play a role, important role, but the business leaders also need to be inculcated and imparted this concept to ensure that, when the reimagination happens, this is not something just saying, cut the cost. I think productivity is important. Cost management is important. Can we do this cost management more efficiently, smartly than going into it? The last bit, which I said, is the reforms. This is where the reforms will come into play. When you say reimagination, I want to give, you see, one of the examples I keep quoting is, I was just experiencing it. Somebody shared with me how the tourism industry in the Greece from home concept, the tourism is dead, but they created a website. They try to take you, walk you through this and make it attractive. Some of the things what you do today may help you tomorrow. So don't think everything in a short term. There is a 3 phases of both. What is the need to reinvent business models, agile business models, but at the same time, what is immediate requirement in terms of short term? What is long-term focus on business continuity plan? Business continuity plan is fast tracking digital transformation, managing people, resources, multi-skilling. I think, how do you use the people to different sources? And what they were trying not to do it earlier, shift from focus on just money to value being created, and need to revisit the purpose and objective of why the organization exists. That is interdependence of businesses globally as well as locally as well as locally. So coming back on the last one, reforms, when you have all these 4 stages, this is where the reforms will come in. What steps you need to take it, make it high tech and high touch, digital disruption, or is it something how to enhance the productivity, how to make people employable, and how to make the stakeholders. It is not just people. I think, it's the whole stakeholders management. For example, if you're talking about a big automobile companies like Maruti, how do you shape your vendors? And like, if you got a Horlicks and tons of milk which comes, and the wheat flour and barley malt, in a food processing industry, how do you make the farmers more educated and make it more innovative to get it? So this is the whole sum and substance of my things, where I said this is a new normal to next normal. From normal, it's a balance of lives and livelihood. There is a mental anxiety, depression, mental health versus physical health, lives versus livelihood. The 4-5 stages is not just one quick fix we can do, but is an opportunity, threat into convert into opportunity. And there are 5 stages, which I said, it is the resolve, where is the first stage, resilience, the liquidity and financial thing, return. When you get back to normal, how do you convince people, health workers, for example, in the hospitals, from they're facing many situations, and also the return and the reimagine and reform. So this is my brief talk on this, Sakleen, and to others.
Yeah, thank you, Dwarka.
That was really wonderful. In fact, sir, there are 2 very important questions which have cropped up, and I'll take them together because both of them are related. One is that what are the 3 big challenges that HR is immediately likely to face post-COVID? That's one. And the second one is that what is the challenge that HR as a department faces itself? I mean, so it's not from the organizational perspective, but HR as a function and a department itself. So these 2 are kind of related. So I just thought I'll field them together.
Okay, I will certainly, thanks for raising these questions. I think other panelists also can participate. But, there are 2 steps here I would like to submit. One is don't wait for post-lockdown. Even today, as I said it, we are facing this challenge. Some of the people were facing the challenge where their places never been under lockdown. How do you bring the workforce to the plants or to the offices and make it happen? And secondly, the healthcare which we face, some of them been got into a difficult situations and the fear of syndrome. So this is where I think here at this stage, some sort of a counseling where people are required, not to everyone, and also to give a comfort, their families are being safe and health. That is one. After the lockdown is lifted, one of the things is, I think this is the planning needs to be done from now. Some of the things is easy to say, difficult to follow. The fundamental question everybody will have, Neeraj, is that what will happen to me? Will I exist after this? I think this is the question everybody will have. My job will become redundant, or there will be restructuring. Before that, there will be salary cut, or I need to take a part-time. There are many questions which will come into it. If you really feel, I'm not saying you give false promises give false assurances. It is difficult to stay. As I said, it's a blind room, blind man, 8 blind men with elephant in a room. We don't know how it will shape and evolve, but we need to think positively. If you say that, you need to dispel as much as possible some of the challenges, anxieties, syndromes they have. First, what will happen to me? Then what will happen to my team? And secondly, how the work will be. Will it be same way? Definitely the work will not be in the same way. The officers, swanky officers will go. And secondly, try to train people how to work remotely, those who are not used to it. So this will be some of them. And second question, I don't know why, Neeraj. I think, I have been in this profession for 49 years. I think, for last 35 years, Saklin Bhai, I am getting this question. This was written in the Harvard Business Review thrice, whether HR exists. Why HR people get these sort of doubts, I can't understand. If HR doesn't exist, you take it from me, other businesses would never exist, my dear friend. As long as there are human beings in this planet, HR will exist. The only thing is the kind of HR, if you ask Saklin or many other seniors will do, what you've done in 70s, what you've done in 80s, what you've done in 90s, what is done in 2000, what you do post-COVID can undergo transformation change. That is why we are talking about transformation. Please prepare for the change. Take it in positive sense. Try to transform yourself. Don't get into doubts. Please go and read the reprinted article of 2001, whether HR will survive. Every time there is outsourcing, we get worried. I'm getting this question in every panel. Please feel free, as long as you are employable, as long as you have the ability to adjust yourself. A leader is one who can cope up with change. Are you willing to cope up with change is the true question.
I think in addition to what Dwarka rightfully explained, I also saw in the chat this question of 3 top priorities of HR, or some of the key things. I think in the current context, in my thinking, addition to what Dwarka already explained, communication will be one basic priority in HR, in my thinking. That will be in the crisis leadership, the biggest link, most critical. Second is the medical assurance, health, safety of the employees back into restart post lifting of lockdown, in my thinking. Third is, as I said earlier, there is no need to panic or to react. I think we must look at a more pause and then maybe a medium-term perspective on HR strategy or resilience. There's this big question going on salaries. I think we must pay the salaries for April and then look at a kind of recovering through extra work when we are in good times, maybe 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line. That will be a more positive thinking from HR, where we look at a balancing of business as well as people needs. We pay salaries, but we do some extra work, some discretionary work, some kind of higher ownership in good times to recover performance, recover business. Perhaps we are also looking at this question. Second one is that what will happen to HR? I think, as Dwarka rightly said, if we are able to align ourselves to the changing business environment, needs of the business framework, if we can bring value to the table when we are looking at the board level or HR leadership level roles, then perhaps HR will remain as critical part of the integral part of the business framework. And somewhere I think we need to be now convinced that instead of being a side-on players, the staff function, support function, I think we should start looking at a business function identity for HR. And that is where perhaps we look at transformation, change, and we look at many other initiatives. When we are looking at some other questions, Neeraj, quickly I will address, because I was looking at that. Somebody was talking about whether there will be a transition of definition of blue collar and white collar getting converted into a career collar. I think when we talk of gig workforce, I think somewhere we are emerging on that new normal, as Dwarka also talked about. But gradually, I think perhaps these concepts will emerge. There was also a question of what will be the future of higher education. I think through e-learning modules, there can be a great future. Only thing is we'll have to selectively delete our past and then look at some new applications and new versions. There was also maybe this question is whether companies should prepare for contingencies. Let me tell you that Japanese companies for ages have been following this practice of preparing for contingencies. So they are less shocked, less surprised compared to other maybe multinationals or Indian companies. Threat of COVID, when we are looking at regulatory effects, Sudhakar talked about FIR, or maybe the factory or occupier or factory manager can be jailed. I think all this is being represented by the chambers of employers strongly, and I think started withdrawal from the kind of regulatory orders which came out. So I don't think it's a major threat. Maybe we are looking at two-wheeler industry potential. Obviously, when I talked about old cars or small cars, I think two-wheelers versus public transport will get a boost in due course of time. So potential should be reasonably fine in my assessment. There was also this question that what we are planning to do, start of the Manesar plant production. Let me clarify, as I said earlier, we do not plan to do any production till 4th of May. We are just preparing facilities for gradual readiness state, because all the equipment, machinery, utility support, blast furnaces, everything will have to bring into proper working mode. It may take about week, 10 days. And then post lifting of lockdown, we'll try to see the supply chain challenge when we start work. So I think I have tried to cover some questions, Neeraj, which we missed. So we can now look at moving on with Shalini's contribution now as a panel speaker.
Yeah, we had a great session with Mr. Dwarakanath, and now we will have Dr. Shalini Sarin to speak to us and share her thoughts and views with us. So, Mr. Siddiqui, may I request you to briefly introduce Dr. Shalini before she takes over this session?
Right. Dwarka, thank you very much, and I hope you will be with us till we conclude.
Sure.
I welcome, thank you, Dwarka. I welcome Shalini. Please join us. You have been there right from the beginning. Let me give you a little brief background that Shalini just came back from Amsterdam after completing her global assignment with Philips as Human Resource Global Head. And now she is Director Electromobility. She has told me about this, but very difficult for me to explain, but something to do with e-vehicles and some charging infrastructure. She is an executive coach and a strategic advisor now on the board of Linde India, Meritor, and Automotive Excels, and Kirloskar Oil Engines. But I think I have been interacting with Shalini even before she joined Philips, part of Schneider Electric, and it has been a great kind of value add from her, part of the HR fraternity. So I think you people will be delighted to hear her perspective, which will be more dealing with employee communication, engagement, and related HR processes. Shalini, please, all yours.
Thank you very much, Siddiqui. And I think it was wonderful. I was totally engrossed listening to the stalwarts so far, and I don't know what more I can add. So I think what I will do is I'll summarize my points. And Neeraj, if you can just put up those 2 slides. What I have done is I have segregated the actions from HR into 2 parts, short-term and long-term. And some of the short-term actions that I don't know whether he's putting it up, but anyway, I can go through them. Some of the short-term actions or immediate actions, as I would call them, is number 1 is priority on employee health, safety, wellness. In fact, well-being to wellness. And why I'm saying this is extremely important is, while there are clear guidelines on working from home, no travel, no coming to office and internal meetings, many of the employees, when I interacted with them, they said we did not get clear guidelines on whether we can go for external meeting or not. It was only because of the lockdown, when the lockdowns came in India, that there was no alternative, and that's why employees were not going out as well. So what I'm trying to say is clarity of communication, clarity of expectations, and clarity of all the medical benefits that are covered for them as well. So this is extremely important, that employees get clear communication on health, wellness, and well-being. And there were a lot of employees who were stuck and could not travel back to their home. So a lot of companies, what they've done is those employees who are living alone have been assigned a buddy. Now that buddy just does a check-in to see if that person is okay or not. And some organizations have also said of self-reporting, that everybody must self-report to their managers that they are well. So I think that obsession about employee health, wellness, and well-being was extremely important and our priority number one. Our priority number two, as all the other speakers have also talked about, is communication. But some of the organizations have done a wonderful job. What they have done is they have clearly listed what is the protocol, what is the guideline, and what is the cadence. For example, if you are a manager, you need to be able to connect to your team every day or every week or bi-weekly, whatever it takes. Also, for some managers, empathy comes naturally. For other managers, they are more task-oriented. So when they do a check-in, they are checking on whether that invoice has been sent, whether that work has been done or not. So they've helped, HR teams have created a checklist of how to begin a conversation, whether it is asking about family, about health, about how they spend their time, what are their challenges, etc., before they get into the business. Some of the companies like Philips, in fact, has also done, where the global CEO does a virtual coffee corner. Now, this has nothing to do with work. All he's doing is he's doing a check-in with the employees informally, doing a virtual coffee. And that virtual coffee is just checking on, how's the family, if he has a dog, what's the dog doing, or if there is a guitar lying behind, which music do you play? So to keep the employee motivated, because the manager has a clear protocol of doing the check-ins and also doing the business update. So some of these cue cards, guidelines, and cadence have really helped. The third one focus for HR is to ensure that the remote working support tools and benefits are ramped up. So while the IT team is doing a ramp up on investment, providing laptops to those who don't have, in fact, in some of the companies, they said we even gave our desktops because we were running short of laptops, broadbands, Wi-Fi, dongle, whatever it takes for the employees to have a better connection at home, because not everybody had all the best connectivity at home. Some of the companies have also provided COVID kits to their workers. And COVID kits or COVID supplies include hand wash, sanitizers, masks, gloves, et al. Meetings are conducted over Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Dropbox have been enlarged and enhanced. Collaborative ways of working have been invested in. Point number 4, role-based working hours. This was a very innovative thing that some of the companies have started doing. Which roles will have to come every day or connect right now during the lockdown every day? For factory workers, increase the number of shifts. So if there are 2, they increase it to 3 or 4, but reduce the number of hours and then had that gap between the shifts as well to ensure that there is social distancing norm. For the corporate office, of course, there's a lockdown right now, but they've already identified roles which will come weekly, bi-weekly, or even fortnightly. So I'm talking about the short term right now. Employee engagement, and of course, there's a host of activities that employee engagement that comes under employee engagement. Of course, the reassurance by the CEO, by the manager, the empathy, but also yoga classes, doing the team doing yoga together, fitness, creating a lot of communities to share pictures, to share how they are facing certain challenges at home. Some people did not get food supplies or vegetables. How are they managing? What are they doing? Sharing recipes, video chats. And they also created a norm that you don't necessarily have to connect on the morning meeting. You can even view the video of the recorded morning meeting in case you are not a presenter or a community. So they have identified those roles and also given that kind of flexibility to their employees so that they can listen to the recording and send their comments or their feedback later on. And of course, there are training being conducted, employee resource groups. So they have identified a set of employees who are resource employees who will provide instant support or are available over call if there is a crisis, if somebody needs a medical emergency or any help. They've also identified change agents who are driving programs after program. So more frequent leadership town halls, team huddles, buddies, health specialists, physical and mental both, trainers, speakers, in establishing employee hotline with manned doctors and tie-ups with hospitals. This was something which was very unique that I found. There is an emergency response team, and of course, training for everybody to acknowledge anxiety and manage that, and be self-aware of that anxiety. Next point is on salary. So on salary related, there has been a host of discussion, but what I find some of the companies doing is they paid out March salary. Most of them are paying April salary also. But for the next 3 months, top management has already agreed, or senior leaders, to take a 10% cut in many of the organizations, and middle management up to 4 to 5 days in a month. That means they've already said that you can work for 4 days a week, and the 5th day should be your. And for the blue collared workers, there is no cut, and they are managing them. However, after 3 months, they will review again what they have to do. The merit increases have been deferred in some of the companies, either by 3 months or even by 6 months. The 7th point, hiring freeze in most of the organizations that I'm either on the board of or I have worked for. No promotions, no replacements, and also encouraging leave without pay, sabbaticals, and of course, the performance related actions. The 8th point, establishing new approval process, because now people are remotely working. So what are the new approval process, whether it is for any budget or whatever else. Meeting flexibility, I already talked about. Ramp up on training. There's a huge focus on training for employees. And this is over and beyond the other training to build your capability or acquire new skill. More than that, there is a lot of training for managers on how to handle crisis, how to develop empathy, patience, tolerance, resilience, and this manager capability building is a very, very big focus. And also for employees, what else can they do to multi-skill, acquire new skill, new learnings, etc. And also tolerance not only towards their teams, but tolerance towards their suppliers, because the small MSMEs are going through a very, very difficult time and they are the worst impacted. So how can you be proactive, flexible, and adaptable towards other stakeholders as well? Ramp up internal mobility and reskilling. So this is a big in the absence of hiring, in the absence of backfilling, internal mobility has taken a very, very big scale, and therefore people who have the ability to learn and to take the risk are being redeployed. So with that, I'll move to the next slide, which is actually talking about the long-term measures, mid-term and long-term. So while I think all of this is immediate and it's a crisis and we don't know, we are not prepared how to deal with it, I think the biggest mistake we will make is to believe that this is going to be wished away. And I think Siddiqui, Sudhakar, and Dwarka all have mentioned the same. So what are the measures that I need to take long term? Continue to invest in IT infrastructure, bandwidth, and all the automation, whether it's 3D and AI and ML, DS, robotics, however I can leverage that, because that is wherever the budgets were stuck, that is going to get a ramp up. The next one is we will have to remodel and redesign our offices. Many of the offices have already started the plans. And like Dwarka said, everything is not doom and gloom. You have the time to plan now. So I think this is the time for us to plan, whether it is one cubicle in between left to begin with, or later on remodel the office requirements, bring it down, which are the roles which don't really need to come to office. And I remember this was about 7-8 years ago when work from home was such a big taboo in the industries that I was working with, that when I first proposed, it was thrown out of the window by the management team, saying, ab to kaam ho gaya, if we allow people to work from home. And that's when we wanted to do it for maternity, women coming after maternity, and this is about 8-9 years ago. And people did not trust that if people are working from home, they are actually working. But the whole paradigm has changed. In the last 8 years, I've seen this being encouraged, but now it will be forced. And now people see that there is so much productivity. People are not wasting time, not on the roads, not on the coffee corners or whatever else, but the output is coming. And everybody that I speak to say that, we are busier than we were in the office, because we are trying to get a lot done, and we are also managing the home and the housework because the house help is not available. So remodeling and work from home policies, work from home infrastructure, and of course the office requirement, like Sudhakar said, work from home and work for office, both norms will have to be created by us and clarified. The next, of course, cost, and we will have to relook at how much fixed costs do we want to keep and how much variable, whether it is through outsourcing, whether it's gig economy, whether it's through temping, whatever sources that we use. And I remember a few years ago in the Netherlands, I was doing an Ivy League circle of some of the alumni of American universities living in the Netherlands. And they said, why must we have a job contract? These job contracts should change. And of course, the analogy they gave me is not relevant for India, but it was relevant for them. It says, I have friends who have had 4 or 5 marriages and have gone out of every marriage contract. And I have another friend who's been staying with the same life partner for 20 years and has no legal marriage contract. So the analogy, of course, they gave me was relevant for that society, but not for ours. But what they're saying is, why must I be married to one organization for my life? I want to be on an interesting project, and I want to work on the gig through a gig economy, be a part of a system through a project and not through an employment contract. And maybe it's time now for us to focus on such things. At that time, it completely surprised me. So what is our new compensation structure going to look like? Again, the variable component within the compensation structure, our contracts. How will we define the new communication channels? Will we need pamphlets and brochures and paper-based, whatever else that we do, communication and hoardings? We may not. So we'll have to leverage more of the digital media and more of the social media. Revisit of strategy. Some businesses might disappear and some new might appear. And therefore, I may have to ramp up the headcount in that business and ramp down and get some very, very different skills, which I did not invest in enough before. Cybersecurity, for example, is going to gain a lot of momentum, and that's going to become very crucial for us. You must have all read the article on Zoom, how leaky it could have been and porous. So, of course, Zoom is doing to strengthen it as well. But how does cybersecurity and sharing of documents? Imagine we are having now our board meetings through the electronic media, virtually, and they're confidential papers. So how do you secure all of that? How do you build the new culture when employees are not really going to come to office every time? How are you going to do the performance management, the business continuity, and the various channels, like even investing in the search engine? How are you going to do the risk assessment? Is it going to be a shorter cycle? We have organizations where every work stream is being reevaluated to be able to do that long-term planning for next year, so that before we open up, we are prepared. How is manpower planning and redeployment going to look like? What are the investment decisions, capital expenditure? Logistics and supply chain is becoming absolutely more important, and it is actually music to my ears with some changes of localization. Maybe it will reduce the urban wrath and the crowded cities. And Siddiqui mentioned a silver lining. I don't know whether that's a silver lining, that people will own more private cars and use less public transport. Though I'm from EV mobility and now I have a startup as an EV charging infrastructure. I mean, for pollution, for environment, for the busy roads, congestion, having more number of cars and less public transport, I don't think it's a good idea. But yeah, adversity has a seed for innovation, like Dwarka shared, automotive, making ventilators. We also in Kirloskar had some tillers were used as spray sanitizers. What will be our new pro-social behavior when the survival instincts have re-emerged? I was reading an article that post-SARS, there were people who were scared to go out on the road, scared to travel, scared to use a tram, scared to celebrate and greet someone. When people used to say sneeze earlier, we used to say, God bless you. Now when people sneeze, I see eyes, get away. So it's scary to see what the new normal will be. And look forward to looking at what the new world will be as we evolve from emergency to emergence. Back to you, Neeraj.
Thank you, Shalini. Great. I think Bijoy will be with us now, coordinating further, but very, very interesting perspective coming from you. And I think it is completing our complete, thought process right from the word go, when we started from the macro to coming to specific details, as you explained. And I think you have raised this perspective slightly differently. So if questions, maybe Bijoy, will you help
Yeah,
Shalini?
I'm sharing the questions. The first one is how can HR ensure teams are motivated considering that people are currently working from home?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be the biggest challenge. And while I have worked in global teams, and I remember this was one big training that we used to provide to global managers who had their teams all over the world, uh, how to ensure that they are proactive and communicating more over meetings, which is online video meetings. So we used to have our Skype for Business, or now Microsoft Teams. We moved to Microsoft Teams. And uh, every week, meetings were fixed with the entire globe. So I had 22 people, and they were spread all over the world. So I think we will have to leverage more and more technology, uh, allocate time for check-ins and check-outs. What is check-in? Check-in is only to check how are you feeling, how's your family, is anything keeping you behind or stopping you from being 100% available for this meeting. Those were the check-ins before we got into the meeting. And what were the check-outs? Did we cover everything that was on your mind? Did we achieve your objective or the team objective? So check-ins and check-outs were sacrosanct.
Okay. Now the another question which is being posted is, will contract manufacturing increase in post-COVID world? Like the permanent employees will get reduced and
Yeah.
more trend will be more towards having contract laborers.
So I'll tell you, world over, this trend is already there. In the US, it has been rampant. 55% of the workforce was already on contract. In Europe, less so because of the legalities, and India, of course, even lesser, and rest of Asia, I'm not as familiar, and maybe Siddiqui can talk more about it. But in the US, this is a rampant trend, and I think with COVID, this might become a reality world over. But I would really invite comments from Siddiqui on this.
Yeah, I think Shalini, I fully endorse, agree with your view, because I think the challenge which we are seeing before COVID also, I think somewhere to a great extent, the ratio between regular and temp in the last one decade has gone in favor of the temps. So it is now 60-40 types of temp, 60-40 regular. But with COVID-19, I think first reaction, most of the MSMEs and medium-sized companies, they are most likely to have a higher temp ratio, is one perspective. But at the same time, I think we will be looking at, as senior HR thought leaders, to ensure that the social discrimination is reduced, compensation is reasonably competitive for the temp staffing, whether white collar or blue collar, and that will pave the way for gig workforce kind of a concept, or maybe a career collar kind of a concept coming in, as you rightly said. The other part, when we are talking of motivating people working from home, one new thing which we have tried, although we are not having much experience, is connecting with families once during this crisis, not only our employees, but 40 of them with their families, and interacting with their families by giving facts on COVID-19 and helping them to understand there is no need to panic, and do's and don'ts, and how we are going to take care of our people when we restart. And then some short stories for kids to create some little excitement for a 1 hour interaction, which was, I think the feedback was phenomenal. People were having very boring kind of, scary kind of lockdown experience in the home, little depressed also. So I think some such kind of innovations can be looked at, where HR can go beyond business and look at connecting with people with great empathy, with great passion. And maybe Dwarka emphasized this psychic income. I think our connectivity with our people through the VC, where we talk to the wife, to the kids, was the psychic income example, really.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Siddiqui. In the Netherlands and even in the US, some of our employees in R&D temp workers were higher paid than
Yeah.
So you
Absolutely.
don't know. I mean, what I really liked what Siddiqui mentioned, that the gap between the highest and the lowest will reduce, and this happened in most of the socialist countries. But I think it's time that these things will come in India and maybe reduce the gap between the haves and the have-nots, and therefore have probably some impact on reducing crime as well.
Yeah.
Another
One
question
example, perhaps, Bijoy and Shalini,
Yeah.
I think while we are closing now this program, because we'll be looking at this timeline of 5:30. I think when we are looking at post-COVID-19 situation for human resources, to look at a pause, to look at maybe a more medium-term perspective on strategic HR decisions. As I shared, China experience also suggested that they made some medium to long-term decisions in a hasty manner, which they are at the moment realizing that it was a foolish mistake. Second part is that perhaps communication link and employee health and safety, as Shalini also emphasized, I think should be the bigger priorities when we restart. We are looking at maybe a kind of future where there will be focus on multi-skilling, maybe job rotation. We are looking at maybe more effectiveness, more contribution from people, less supervisory levels, as Sudhakar mentioned. But I think transformation and this new normal, they are going hand in hand. So any resistance to change will create a big problem for all of us. One perspective on the costs. All the time when some such crisis happens, like the one which happened, global recession, 2006-7, I think we start looking at people as the bigger cost heads. But I'll give you one example which could be a good kind of understanding for all of us. In case of our company, I think a few years back, we ran a campaign driven by none other than our chairman, Mr. Osama Suzuki. Let us reduce 1 gram weight of each component to save 1 yen or 1 rupee, right? Very small thing. 1 gram weight reduction of one component, which goes into the car to save 1 rupee or 1 yen. And how many components go into a car? About 5,000. Let us assume 5,500 or something. So per car saving will be how much? Will be about 5,500 rupees. And with 14, 15 lakhs cars, for example, what we are doing this year with this reduced minus 18%, it will be about 7,000 crores saving every year. Where is the need to hit people? So what I'm saying is, when we look at thinking HR, when we look at a cool mind, when we look at non-reactive HR, when we look at a medium to long-term strategic perspective on HR, there can be many ways to handle crisis situations, adversity. Avoid getting in your company, into a reactionary HR. Convincing CEOs or the board with lot of analytics can help in this perspective. Maybe we are looking at handling crisis as a new leadership trait, as Dwarka also mentioned. We are looking at maybe new normal as the reality. So better to start decoding and trying to adjust to this new normal by selectively deleting the past. We are looking at this both for businesses as well as for HR. I'm not talking of one, that business must delete selectively and look at new normal, HR should remain the same. No, I think both perspectives will be equally. Maybe looking at, Shalini also said, Sudhakar also said, Dwarka also said, and I'm also saying, relook at manpower cost restructuring. Maybe a kind of a ratio between fixed to variable. Maybe looking at psychic income, reward, and recognitions. Maybe looking at maybe job rotation, multi-skilling. Maybe looking at ratio of temp to regular. Somewhere, I think we must look at this lowest paid to highest paid, especially in US companies, in European companies, in Indian companies. I think somewhere there will be a good way of balancing things. And to a great extent, organization structure redesign could be a good HR innovation. Team-based structures, profit-center organizations, empowered young teams could be way forward. Decentralizing regions, rural will be the way forward. I think somewhere you will be also doing a risk mitigation strategy rather than doing all eggs in one basket. I think we can maybe restructure the organization. And somewhere in case of companies like Maruti, I think to a great extent, we will be looking at restart, and we're looking at human safety and health as the topmost priority. I think my basic understanding is that with the contribution coming from Shalini, with Sudhakar, with Dwarka, whatever I could contribute, this AIMA initiative, eDialogue on the kind of business and HR challenges post-COVID should seem relevant to you. I hope these perspectives will help you to think more and then perhaps find your way in your company, in your customized way. So our very best wishes, and thank you for joining us for this first eDialogue of AIMA HR committee. Thanks a lot. My best
Thank you,
wishes.
everybody. We thank Mr. Siddiqui for leading this discussion, and Mr. Dwarakanath, Mr. Sudhakar, and Dr. Shalini for contributing their insights and views with us. And we thank all the participants for sparing their time to join us in this discussion. Hope this would have been very useful to you. And we are truly grateful to BML Munjal University for supporting us in bringing this series of programs for you, which we feel is very relevant and timely. And you will all benefit out of this. Thank you very much.